Hey guys, Misnari Matsu here, coming with your Period 5 Khan Academy. Sorry, incorrect date there, so I'm going to go ahead and change this. Causes and strategies of the Civil War. So by now, we've already known the major causes of the Civil War leading up to this, as you guys know, but these are the direct military causes. But we're already aware of, the Compromise of 1850 leading to popular sovereignty issues, especially in the territories of Kansas, Nebraska, kind of moving the anti-slavery abolition view of the North with that against the slave-owning view of the South, and slavery being the number one issue. And with the election of 1860 and Abraham Lincoln as a confessed anti-slavery, which is much again different than abolitionists, as we know, and we'll get into again. That really starts the secession movement. And Abraham Lincoln is apprehensive at first. His goal is actually not to start a war. He actually just sits there and waits for the South, hopefully, to come back. But ultimately, kind of puts it in the South's hands, where the South, with Fort Sumter, basically attacks it. And it is a Union troop. So now we have federal troops attacking now federal troops, and the lines have been drawn, and we get an actual civil war that gets declared after that. And so we'll get into it and the strategy of it. This is a great map, that I would like you guys to take a look at. Apologize for that. But this really shows the different states at that time that went Republican. Kind of doesn't really show. This shows a little bit of these border states, so it doesn't really talk about too much of these border states. But the border states being like, what is Kentucky? But I think that was called West Virginia at the time, and Missouri. These border states, they keep with the Union. They don't actually go and secede with the South, but yet they are a highly slave owning and kind of culturally kind of more southern than northern state. So these border states are going to be really influential to Abraham Lincoln, especially when we come down to the Emancipation Proclamation and actually this war effort and all. He knows that he needs these border states for him to succeed. And so it really changes, his relationship at certain levels with them, and has him make some compromises that we may look back and be critical of Lincoln of, but him, considering the importance of these border states, want to focus on. So, as you guys can see, Jefferson Davis, which is, I don't think here, he gets elected as the president of the Confederacy later down here. And so we got the Confederate States versus the Union or the United States, and they're fighting each other. The strategy of the Civil War, again, guys, when it comes to military history, College Board, and I think thankfully for us, kind of limits the detail that you need to know about military history and the different battles. But we'll quickly review these because this does show up on the key concept. And if some of you guys are saying what is the key concept, go back to my tips and tricks, because it really dials in what's important or not. But inside the key concept, it really does focus on the strategy. So it's not clear in the American Revolution. This isn't clear in the War of 1812. But for the Civil War, it is clear that you do need to know some strategies for the test. You could have a multiple choice question or otherwise on the test regarding it. So, I kind of paused it here because it kind of shows some things, which I really like. We'll talk about the Southern strategy. The Southern strategy was basically come and get us, right? Home court. They know the terrain. This is my house. We are succeeding for a reason, so theoretically for states' rights. We started this war for a reason. They were motivated. They also had really, really strong leadership. One of the most famous generals, Robert E. Lee, is just literally a military genius when it comes to the movement of doing things, and it's kind of the failure of the first one, which, as you can see, he was a Democrat. So he was actually kind of linked up with kind of some of the Southern views, and not the Southern views, but he's considered a Northern Democrat. Remember that all the South, the Confederacy, they were all Democrats. Grant will come in and be quite a strong leader for the general for the North that will definitely counter some of the moves of Robert E. Lee. Another thing was outlast the North. Some of these Union members and some of these troops, had never gone to the South. They themselves may not have dealt with slavery at any level, And so it kind of begins to feel like, what are these young boys doing fighting for slavery when it's not really affecting places like New York or Maine or Massachusetts? So it lasts. And also appeal to Europe. At this time, cotton was very strong. And they were hoping through economic ties, more importantly, that Britain would come to the aid of the South, similar how France came to the aid of the 13 colonies during the French, that started during the American Revolution, how the French came in. So they were thinking that the British might be coming to the South because it's economic tie, and the British actually kind of just stay out of it. Most of Europe stays out of this. Well, that was a fear by the North and the Union. It was, this is an easy way for Europe to kind of get its hand meddled in young America and kind of influence the outcome of this war and keep us divided, right? Because it's a lot easier to take a country that's divided than is united. And so that is in the background of Abraham Lincoln consistently being concerned about the European influence, especially to help out the South and divide the country, making it a little bit easier maybe in the future to pick off. The North's view is kind of outlast, and this is really underneath Grant, but it's really to outlast through population and goods, right? They have an industrial base. They're making a lot more factories. They're getting a lot more weaponry. They're maybe able to move those supplies much faster using the railroads. Railroads did exist in the South, but they nearly were as extensive as they were in the North. This actually map kind of details some of those railroad lines. And just through more people and more ammunition, and the faster that we can go, we're just going to overwhelm you. It almost came there's a saying of, anyways, I lost that saying, but the military strategy of just, all out effort and overwhelming them. Some of you guys are probably like saying that's what it is, like a war of attrition at certain levels, attrition, right? Just kind of overwhelming the enemy with just more and more troops. And another thing that they tried to do, and pretty darn successfully, was the Anaconda Plan, which is basically to block their trading routes on the Mississippi, the port of New Orleans, and the East Coast here to limit their economic trade. And economically, if they couldn't trade with others during this time, they would become weaker. So the anaconda, like a snake is an anaconda that would wrap itself around. So that was the idea of the strategy. You're going to come to two documents that we may show up on the test. I don't think that the Emancipation Proclamation or the Gettysburg, I could see the Gettysburg Address showing up. I don't know about the Emancipation Proclamation, but nonetheless, these are completely detailed inside the key concepts. So we'll review them. Just going back, what's interesting is that Abraham Lincoln kind of wrote this document, and he had it in his back pocket literally for a year. And so you're wondering, this might challenge your view of Abraham Lincoln as this guy that wanted to free the slaves, but remember that he's kind of, again, an anti-slavery, and his first focus, for the most part, is keeping the country together. He even says, hey, border states, hey, southern states, you guys can keep your slaves. We just can't have this thing continue, that whole anti-slavery view. And one thing I want to remind you guys about, I don't think I made clear in the other ones, is like, these free soilers that are coming over to make sure the land is free is not necessarily being free of slavery because they have a moral obligation, because of economics. And this comes back to Abraham Lincoln's father. A lot of northern farmers, independent farmers, saw slave-owning farmers have an unfair advantage and be able to produce a lot more of a good at a much cheaper cost, and could basically undermine an independent farmer who didn't have any slave labor. And that was true of, Lincoln. He grows up in Kentucky, and as a poor man, he's only going to have 1 year of schooling. And his father is basically pushed out and goes further and further north up into Illinois. And the only reason why he does so is he leaves Kentucky because he gets basically outbought by slave owners who have a little bit more cash and what we call capital to purchase the land. And so he can't compete, and he can't compete with even the purchase of the land. So he kind of moves on. So Abraham Lincoln, one thing that's interesting is he's always concerned about these border states, as I kind of talked about earlier. And these border states have slaves as well. And so he doesn't want to get them so angry that it kind of tips the tide back into the South. So what's interesting about the Emancipation Proclamation is it doesn't free all slaves, right? That's the common misconception is emancipation frees all slaves. It frees slaves in the ones that have publicly rebelled and have officially seceded. The border states actually get to keep their slaves. and it's kind of well written in there. So they're going to go into the actual details about it, but that's basically the big information you need to know from me, and also just the background of why Abraham Lincoln does it. It's just really to ensure to win the war, he's going to have to make sure he doesn't frustrate the border states, and that's why I kind of paid attention to them a little bit earlier. Lastly, we have the Gettysburg Address. In this picture, you can see Abraham Lincoln right there, and this kind of is cool because it shows you a photograph and you guys can understand. Now we're having the transmission of technology about where we're at. We still got muskets that you have to load the old school style. We're not getting, we do have revolvers at this time, not to get to military technology. We do have railroads that are going. So it gives you an idea of where we're at this time. It's kind of like Wild Wild West cowboy type of experiences happening right now. But they're going to talk about the details, Gettysburg Address. It's kind of interesting that I didn't really know this, that, there is these orators, right? These people that could speak really, really well. And people, it's like a movie. It's like a play. Again, there's no Netflix at that time, guys. There's none of this streaming stuff. So they have to entertain themselves somehow. And so this great orator, this great speaker, I guess, gives this 2-hour, address about the importance of Gettysburg. And Lincoln comes in and does his in about 2.5 minutes and drops a mic and walks out. And as your lecturers say, people actually look in the crowd, they look at each other and go, whoa, that's all it was? That was the president? He only spoke for 2 minutes? This other guy spoke for 2 hours? And he's going to talk about the reasons why he was so short. And so I'm not going to get too much into that. It is a famous document and does show up on the key concepts. So you'll be able to review that then. All right, guys. We'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye, pushers.